The California sun hadn't yet cleared the eastern hills when Cassandra Thorne pushed open the gate to the Coronado Precision Rifle Range. 5:30 in the morning. The air still held the cool kiss of the Pacific that brief window before the heat turned the concrete pads into griddles and made the mirage dance like water over asphalt. She moved through the empty lanes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual 1,000 times. The push broom made a rhythmic scraping sound against the concrete. Spent brass casings clinked into her collection bucket with the musical randomness of wind chimes. Each piece of copper and steel told a story, a missaid shot, a perfect group, a lesson learned or ignored. At lane 5, she paused. A single cartridge lay separate from the others, gleaming in the early light. She bent down and picked it up. The weight was familiar in her palm. .338 La Pua Magnum. The brass was still bright, recently fired, the primer cleanly struck. The world shifted, not here, not now, but there. Always there, Syria 18 months ago. The scope's reticle steady on her target, the wind flags hanging limp in the pre-dawn stillness. Her spotters breathing beside her, calm and measured. The target, a high-value individual who had orchestrated 3 suicide bombings in as many weeks, stepping out onto a balcony to smoke his morning cigarette. Range 1,350 yards, 3/4 of a mile. The distance where physics became poetry and mathematics became faith. She had made the calculations in seconds. Elevation, windage, the Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation beneath the bullet's flight path. Temperature, humidity, the density of the air at that altitude. Variables stacked on variables, and at the end of that long chain of numbers, a decision. She had squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil pushed back against her shoulder with the familiar authority of a trusted friend. Through the scope, she watched the vapor trail, that ghostly finger pointing across the distance. 2.8 seconds of flight time. An eternity compressed into a heartbeat. The target dropped. Mission accomplished. Except, the bullet, her perfect, precisely calculated bullet, had passed through the target and continued its journey. It struck a metal railing. The angle was wrong, the deflection unpredictable. The bullet fragmented, and one piece found a propane canister tucked against the building's exterior wall. The explosion was small, contained. Tactical assessments would later call it minimal collateral damage. 2 civilians died. A woman and her teenage daughter who had been hiding in that building, refugees from the violence that had already taken everything else from them. The shot had been perfect. The cost had been unbearable. Cass set the brass casing down gently as if it might shatter. She returned to her, sweeping the motion mechanical, now muscles moving, while her mind remained trapped in that moment of fire and consequence. "You're here early." She didn't startle. Master Chief Randall Kellerman moved quietly for a man his size, but she had heard his uneven footsteps on the gravel path. The limp was a souvenir from Mogadishu 1990. He never talked about it, but everyone knew. "Couldn't sleep," she said. Dutch studied her with the patient assessment of someone who had spent 40 years reading men under pressure. His beard was white now, his face carved into deep lines by sun and time, but his eyes remained sharp. "The dreams again. Every night around 0300. He nodded. They had had this conversation before in the way that old warriors discuss their ghosts, briefly, honestly, then moving on because dwelling changed nothing. "Got a SEAL team coming in at 0800, he said. "Young bucks, fresh tridents, lots of attitude." He paused. "Morrison's kid." Cass looked up. "Colonel Morrison?" "The same. Wade's boy. Calls himself Hawk now." The name pulled at something in her memory. Wade Morrison. She had provided overwatch for his convoy in Kandahar province back in 2007. Highway 1, the most dangerous road in Afghanistan. An IED ambush that had turned into a close-range firefight. She had been positioned on a ridgeline 1,100 yards out, too far for most shooters to be effective. But she wasn't most shooters. 2 insurgents with RPGs trying to flank Morrison's position. 2 shots, 2 kills. The convoy had made it out. All 11 men. "Didn't know Wade had a son in the teams," she said. "Joined up right after his dad died. Iraq 2008, IED outside Fallujah." Dutch's voice carried the weight of too many memorial services. "Kid's been trying to fill those boots ever since. Problem is, he's still got his own lessons to learn." Cass returned to her sweeping. "We all do." Dutch watched her for another moment, then limped back toward his office. He paused at the door. Cass, yeah, you're a good maintenance tech, but you were a better instructor. She didn't answer. What was there to say? That title belonged to someone else now. Someone who hadn't made a perfect shot that killed the wrong people. The sun cleared the hills. The heat began its daily assault. And Cassandra Thorne, once called Phantom, once feared and respected and decorated, pushed her broom across the concrete and tried not to think about the faces she saw when she closed her eyes. They arrived in a convoy of pickup trucks at 0800 sharp gear bags piled in the beds. Rifles and cases, the unmistakable swagger of men who had recently earned the right to call themselves SEALs. Cass was working on Lane 8, replacing target stands that had taken one beating too many from high-caliber impacts. She heard them before she saw them, the rough laughter, the aggressive banter, the casual profanity that was the language of young operators who had just survived the crucible and believed themselves immortal. 5 of them, all male, yin fit all, carrying themselves with that particular brand of confidence that came from making it through Bode, Shurs, and surviving Hell Week and earning the trident that marked them as members of the most elite fighting force in the world. The one in front was tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of clean-cut handsomeness that belonged on recruiting posters. He moved with an athlete's grace, but there was tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of pressure. Garrett Morrison. She could see Wade in the shape of his jewel, the set of his shoulders. But where Wade had possessed a quiet confidence, earned through years of combat, his son radiated the brittle intensity of someone still trying to prove something. They claimed lanes 4 and 5, the prime positions, with the best sight lines to the long-distance targets. The team began unpacking their gear with practiced efficiency, rifles, range bags, ammunition cans, spotting scopes, ballistic computers. Everything was new, top of the line, still carrying that fresh from the armory sheen. Cass continued her work invisible in her navy blue hoodie and faded jeans, just another piece of the range infrastructure. Garrett set up behind a Mk13 Mod 7 sniper rifle, the Navy's premier long-range precision weapon. Macmillan stock Schmidt and Bender scope chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. A $250,000 weapon system designed to reach out and touch targets at distances that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. He settled into position behind the rifle, his team spreading out around him. The spotter, a lean man with intense eyes, set up with a spotting scope. The others lounged nearby, watching, offering commentary and suggestions that ranged from helpful to actively counterproductive. The target was set at 800 yards, a steel plate 18 inches square. At that distance, it looked like a postage stamp. The mirage was already beginning to boil off the ground, making the target dance and shimmer. Garrett fired his first shot. The rifle's report cracked across the range. Cass didn't need to see the target to know he had missed. The sound told her everything. The shooter's breathing, the break of the trigger, the subtle shift of weight that came from anticipating the recoil rather than accepting it. High and right, the spotter called. Elevation -1 windage, left half. Garrett adjusted his scope and fired again. Miss. Again, miss. By the 5th shot, his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. His team had gone quiet, the easy banter replaced by the uncomfortable silence that comes when a man is failing, and everyone knows it, but no one knows what to say. It's the barrel, Garrett said, his voice tight. Overheating. It's the wind, someone suggested. It's the mirage, said another. Cass swept her pile of brass casings into the collection bucket. The sound of metal on metal rang out across the range like a bell. Excuse me, Garrett's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. The broom is loud. We're trying to work here. She paused mid-sweep and turned slowly. Garrett was staring at her with the kind of irritation that usually came from heat dehydration or a missed shot. In this case, probably all three. Range goes cold at 1,400 hours for maintenance, she said. Her voice was level, professional, empty of challenge. I have a schedule to keep, same as you. One of the other SEALs, a stocky man with a thick neck, laughed. It was a short barking sound. Maybe she can teach you to shoot Hawk. The nickname, Hawk. Every SEAL seemed to have one earned through some crucible or another. She wondered what his story was, what had earned him that particular handle. Garrett's face flushed. This is precision work, he said, his tone making it clear he was including her in the category of things that interfere with precision work. It requires concentration, The sound of you scraping that broom across the concrete is throwing off my focus. Cass glanced at the digital monitor displaying his shot group. The impacts were scattered across the target area in a pattern that spoke of fundamental errors, not environmental interference. The grouping was drifting right, a classic sign of either poor trigger control or failure to account for the wind's effect on the bullet. She should have kept her mouth shut. She should have nodded, stepped back, let him continue his struggle in peace. That was her job now. Invisible, helpful, forgotten. But she had spent too many years training shooters, too many hours on ranges like this one, watching young operators make the same mistakes over and over because no one had the courage or the knowledge to correct them. Your shots are drifting right because you're favoring your trigger pull, she said. The words came out before she could stop them. You're not accounting for the Coriolis effect at this latitude. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the cicadas in the scrub brush seemed to pause. Garrett stared at her, his mouth slightly open. The other SEALs straightened up, their bored postures suddenly alert. "What did you just say to me?" Garrett asked. His voice had dropped an octave, moving from annoyance to something darker. Cass should have backed down. Should have apologized, made some excuse about overhearing conversation, returned to her sweeping. But she could see the dope card taped to the stock of his rifle, could see the elevation dial settings, could calculate in her head the delta between where he was and where he needed to be. "I said you're pulling your shots," she continued, her tone still matter of fact. "And you're dialed in at 4.2 mils of elevation when you should be at 4.5. The temperature has risen 12 degrees since you started shooting at 0800. Powder burns faster when it's hot. Velocity increases. Your point of impact shifts upward." She gestured toward the canyon walls that framed the eastern side of the range. "And the wind shifted 3 minutes ago. The updraft from the canyon doesn't hit this position until 1400 hours, but when it does, it adds a vertical component to the wind deflection that you're not calculating." Garrett stood up from behind the rifle. He was tall, over 6 feet, and he used his height the way men like him always did, as a tool of intimidation. He moved into her space, looming his physical presence designed to make her step back. "Listen, lady," he said, his voice low and tight with controlled anger. "I don't know what kind of Call of Duty trivia you memorized to impress the guys down at the dive bar, but this is a restricted area. This is for operators, not for the cleaning crew." Behind him, his team watched. The stocky one looked amused. Another, tall with sandy hair and an uncertain expression, seemed uncomfortable with the confrontation. The rest maintained the careful neutrality of men watching a superior officer make a mistake, but unwilling to intervene. Dutch had emerged from his office and was limping toward them, but he was still 50 yards away. Too far to hear, though he could certainly see the body language of the confrontation. Cass met Garrett's eyes. They were green, hard, burning with the kind of wounded pride that came from being called out in front of his team. She had seen that look before in countless young operators who confused confidence with competence, who believed that the trident on their chest made them infallible. "You're guessing," Garrett said. It wasn't a question, it was a dismissal. "Shoot," Cass replied. "Prove me wrong." The challenge hung in the air between them. Garrett's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching. For a moment, she thought he might actually order her off the range, call Dutch, make a scene. Instead, he turned back to the rifle. He sat down hard on the bench, pressed his cheek against the stock with more force than necessary, and adjusted his position. His breathing was too fast, too shallow. His finger moved to the trigger with the kind of aggressive intent that telegraphed the shot before it happened. The rifle cracked. Through long habit, Cass tracked the sound of the bullet's impact. Not the clear ring of steel that meant a hit. Something duller. Dirt. Miss. "High and right," the spotter said, his voice carefully neutral. "Miss by 8 inches. Garrett slammed his hand down on the bench. The sound echoed across the range like a gunshot. "It's the barrel. It's overheating." "It's the shooter," Cass said softly. Garrett spun around in his chair, his face flushed red now, all pretense of control gone. "You want to run your mouth. You think this is easy." He gestured at the rifle with one gloved hand. "Go ahead, since you're the expert. Since you know so much about velocity and spin drift and all this technical bullshit. You show me." One of the other SEALs, the stocky one, chuckled nervously. "Morrison, man, don't do this. Just pack it up." No, Garrett stood, moved away from the rifle, his eyes locked on Cass. She wants to critique my shooting. Let's see if she can back it up. I bet she's never even held a rifle that weighs more than a hairdryer. Dutch had reached them now, moving with his characteristic limp, his face carefully neutral. Morrison, what's the problem here? No problem, Chief, Garrett said, his tone dripping with false courtesy. I'm just inviting the maintenance tech to show us how it's done, since she's apparently an expert on long-range ballistics. Dutch looked at Cass. There was something in his expression, concern mixed with curiosity, maybe a hint of hope. He knew who she was, what she had been, what she was capable of. It's fine, Dutch, Cass said. She set down her broom, leaning it carefully against the concrete pillar that supported the shade structure. If Morrison thinks the broom is the reason he can't hit the target, let's remove the variable. In the parking lot beyond the range, a black SUV pulled through the gate. Cass recognized the vehicle even at this distance. Commander Lucas Vance's official ride. Her old commanding officer, the man who had signed her retirement papers 18 months ago, who had shaken her hand and told her she was making the right choice, who had looked at her with the kind of understanding that came from having made his own hard decisions. She should walk away, should return to her broom and her brass collection and her careful invisibility. But she looked at Garrett Morrison, Wade's son, standing there with his wounded pride and his absolute certainty that she was incompetent based on nothing more than her gender and her civilian clothes, and something inside her that had been carefully controlled for 18 months snapped. Not broke, just shifted. You want me to shoot? She asked. I want you to try, Garrett said, crossing his arms across his chest. And when you miss, and when the recoil knocks you on your ass, I want you to apologize for wasting my time. Then you can get back to sweeping. Cass walked to the bench. The change was instant, fundamental, absolute. The slouch vanished from her shoulders. The careful casualness evaporated like morning dew under the California sun. She moved with a purpose and economy that came from 10,000 repetitions from muscle memory so deep it was engraved in bone. She sat down on the bench, not awkwardly, not tentatively, but as if the seat had been molded specifically for her body. Her hands reached for the rifle and they moved over the weapon's controls with a fluidity that made Garrett blink. Her fingers found the bolt. Handle drew it back smoothly. She tilted the rifle, checking the chamber. Brass glinted. A round was chambered. She verified the magazine, pressed it with her thumb to check tension. Full magazine, 5 rounds. Her hands moved to the scope. She didn't look at the dope card taped to the stock. Didn't ask for environmental data. Didn't reach for the ballistic computer sitting on the bench. She clicked the elevation turret. 3 clicks up. Not 2, not 4, 3. The sound was precise, mechanical, final. Her hand moved to the windage knob. She made an adjustment so subtle that from where Garrett stood, he couldn't even see which direction she had dialed. She was correcting for a wind he hadn't even noticed, reading air currents from the movement of grass and dust that his eyes couldn't process. She shifted slightly, adjusting the rifle's position on the sandbag rest. Pulled the stock into her shoulder with practiced firmness. Adjusted her grip on the forend. Settled her cheek against the stock with the kind of gentle precision that comes only from endless repetition. Behind them, Commander Vance had exited his SUV. He was walking toward the range with Master Chief Wilson, his second in command. Both men wore serious expressions, the kind that usually meant official business. But Dutch had intercepted them, putting a hand on Vance's chest. Dutch pointed toward the firing line. Vance squinted against the sun, following the gesture. Is that a civilian on the rifle? Watch, Dutch said. Just watch. Garrett, focused entirely on humiliating Cass, didn't see his commanding officer arrive. He was too busy preparing his victory speech. Don't close your eyes when you pull the trigger, sweetheart, he said, his voice loud enough for his team to hear. It's going to be loud. Cass ignored him. Her world had narrowed to the circle of glass in front of her eye. Everything else, Garrett's mocking the teams, watching the heat of the sun, the ache in her lower back from hours of sweeping, all of it fell away. The reticle was an old friend. The crosshairs where the vertical and horizontal met that single point, where mathematics and physics in human will converged into absolute certainty. She regulated her breathing. In through the nose, slow and controlled. Out through the mouth, even and measured. She could feel her heart rate slowing, dropping from the elevated pace of confrontation down toward the combat calm she had learned to summon at will, 68 beats per minute, 65, 62, 60. She could feel her pulse in her thumb where it pressed against the stock. She waited. Between heartbeats, there was a moment of perfect stillness. That was when you took the shot. Through the scope, the target seemed to float in the dancing air. 800 yards. The steel plate looked like a postage stamp wavering in the mirage that boiled off the sun-heated ground. She read the mirage like a language. The boil told her everything about the wind between her position and the target. At the muzzle, the wind was moving right to left at maybe 7 miles per hour. But at the target, the grass was bending the opposite direction. Left to right, maybe 9 miles per hour. A fishtail wind, tricky. The kind that fooled shooters into making corrections that were right for one distance, but wrong for another. She made a micro-adjustment to her point of aim, not moving the reticle, but shifting where she intended the bullet to cross the target's plane. The math happened in her head without conscious thought. Years of training, thousands of shots, countless hours of study compressed into pure instinct. Garrett opened his mouth to make another snide comment about how long she was taking. Cass squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared. The sound of a .300 Winchester Magnum is not subtle. It's a violent crack that splits the air and sends shockwaves rippling outward. The recoil pushed back against her shoulder with the force of a heavyweight's punch, but her body absorbed it perfectly, rocking back with the energy rather than fighting it, letting the rifle ride up naturally before settling back down. Her hand was already moving. The bolt handle came back in a blur of motion. The spent casing ejected in a bright arc tumbling through the air. The bolt drove forward, stripping a fresh round from the magazine and chambering it with mechanical precision. The entire sequence shot bolt manipulation rechambering took less than a second. The motions were so practiced, so deeply ingrained, that they blurred together into a single fluid action. Then from downrange, faint but unmistakable ding. The sound of copper-jacketed lead striking hardened steel. The sound that meant a hit. Garrett's jaw dropped. He spun toward the monitor displaying the target camera's feed. The screen showed the steel plate with a fresh impact crater. Dead center, maybe an inch from the exact middle of the target. Luck, he whispered. His voice had lost its edge. That was luck. Cass didn't look up from the scope. She was already tracking, already reading the wind, already calculating the next shot. The vapor trail from her first bullet was still visible in the scope, a ghostly disturbance in the air that showed her exactly how the wind had affected the projectile's flight. She made a fractional adjustment, 1/2 mil of windage. Nothing more. She fired again. Crack. The rifle's recoil, the bolt's mechanical snap-clack, the brass casing arcing through the air. Ding. Another hit. This one was 2 inches from the first. Anyone could see the impacts now on the monitor, 2 fresh craters in the steel, close enough together that they almost touched. The SEAL team had gone completely silent. The mocking amusement had drained from their faces, replaced by something between confusion and awe. Cass cycled the bolt a third time. Her breathing remained steady. Her heart rate hadn't climbed. This was what she had been born to do, trained to do, lived to do for nearly 2 decades of service. She found the target again. Made another microscopic adjustment based on the last shot's impact. The wind was consistent now, steady at 9 miles per hour left to right at the target. She squeezed. Crack. Snap. Clack. Ding. 3 shots. 3 hits. A grouping the size of a grapefruit at 800 yards. She cleared the weapon with the same practiced efficiency. Magazine out. Bolt locked back. Chamber empty and visible. The rifle was safe. She stood up, and as she did, the adrenaline that had sustained her focus drained away instantly. She returned to the calm, collected state of the woman with the broom. The transformation was complete, reversible, like watching a wolf become a dog. She looked at Garrett. His face had gone pale. The arrogance had been wiped away, scrubbed clean by the undeniable evidence of her competence. In its place was a profound confusion and the dawning horror of a man who had just made a terrible mistake. Variable wind, Cass said quietly. Her voice was even instructive, empty of triumph. You were holding for left edge of the target. At this range, with these conditions, you needed to hold left edge and favor high. The canyon updraft comes into play at 1400 hours, like I said, but there's already a thermal effect from the valley floor that creates vertical lift. She turned to walk away and found herself facing Commander Lucas Vance and Master Chief Wilson. They stood 10 feet away. They had seen everything. Garrett saw them too. His eyes went wide. He snapped to attention so fast he nearly tripped over the shooting bench. "Commander, we were just—" "At ease, Morrison," Vance said. His voice was cold. Not angry. Worse than angry. Disappointed. He walked past Garrett without another glance, as if the younger SEAL had ceased to exist. He stopped directly in front of Cass. Commander Lucas Vance was 53 years old. He had spent 30 years in naval special warfare. He had seen combat in more countries than most people could name. He had commanded SEAL teams through operations that would never be declassified. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had earned every ounce of respect his rank commanded. He looked at Cass, took in the civilian clothes, the messy ponytail, the faded jeans and canvas sneakers, the broom leaning against the pillar behind her. Then slowly and deliberately, Commander Vance brought his hand up and rendered a crisp, respectful salute. Garrett Morrison's eyes nearly bugged out of his head. Officers did not salute civilians. It did not happen. It was against regulations, against tradition, against everything he understood about military protocol. Cass hesitated for only a moment. Then she straightened her posture, not to attention. She wasn't in uniform and hadn't been for 18 months, but to the kind of bearing that spoke of muscle memory and deeply ingrained discipline. She didn't return the salute. That would have been inappropriate, but she nodded, a gesture of mutual respect between warriors who understood each other's worth. "Good to see you, Thorne," Vance said. "I heard you were in the area. Didn't know you were working for Dutch." "Keeps me busy, sir," Cass replied. "Keeps the bills paid." Vance turned to Garrett. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Do you know who this is, Petty Officer Morrison?" Garrett's mouth worked, but no sound came out at first. Finally, "No, sir. She said she was the cleaning crew." Vance shook his head. There was genuine disappointment in his expression, now the kind a father might show a son who had failed to live up to basic expectations. "This is Cassandra Thorne," Vance said. His voice carried across the range, pitched so that every member of Garrett's team could hear. Before she retired, she was the lead marksmanship instructor for the advanced sniper course. Before that, she was a designated marksman attached to Task Force Dagger. He paused, letting the words sink in. "She has 52 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. That's more than your entire platoon combined, Morrison. More than most shooters achieve in a full career." The silence on the range was absolute now. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. "She is the only woman to ever complete the Naval Special Warfare Sniper course," Vance continued, "with a perfect score. No missed shots, no failed evaluations. Perfect." He let that hang in the air for a moment. Her call sign was Phantom. The name hit Garrett like a physical blow. Cass could see the recognition flooding his face. Every SEAL knew the stories. The ghost sniper who had provided overwatch in the worst valleys of Afghanistan. The legend who could make shots that seemed impossible. The operator whose very presence on mission made teams feel invincible because they knew someone was watching, someone who never missed. "And you," Vance said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous, "treated her like a servant." Garrett looked at the ground. "I didn't know, sir." "You didn't look," Vance corrected. "You saw a woman with a broom, and you made an assumption. You assumed she was incompetent based on her gender and her civilian clothes. And that assumption just cost you your dignity." He stepped closer to Garrett, forcing the younger man to meet his eyes. "In the field, Morrison, that kind of assumption costs lives. You underestimate a potential threat because of bias, you die. You fail to recognize a potential asset because of prejudice, your team dies." This was a failure of the most basic kind of situational awareness. Vance turned back to Cass. His expression softened just slightly. "I apologize for his behavior, Thorne. They're young. They think the trident makes them gods. They haven't learned yet that the bullet doesn't care about the patch on your shoulder." Cass picked up her broom. "It's fine, Commander. Everyone needs a humility check now and then. Better he gets it here than downrange." She looked at Garrett. He seemed smaller now, stripped of his swagger, standing there with his team watching and his commander disappointed in the full weight of his mistake pressing down on his shoulders. "Morrison," Cass said. "Yes, ma'am." His voice cracked slightly. "Your third shot. The one you took before I sat down. You jerked the trigger. You're anticipating the recoil because you're afraid of the rifle. She kept her tone instructive, not cruel. Respect the recoil. Don't fear it. It's physics, not a punishment. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And Morrison. Yes, ma'am. Cass held out the broom. You're sweeping the range for the next week. Garrett looked at Commander Vance. Vance simply crossed his arms and nodded once. Garrett took the broom. Cass dusted her hands off on her jeans. She picked up her bucket of spent brass with practiced ease and headed toward the storage shed. As she passed Master Chief Wilson, he winked at her. Still got it? Phantom, he murmured. Never lost it, she whispered back. The sun was climbing higher now, the heat building toward the afternoon peak. The breeze had picked up slightly, carrying the smell of sage from the hills and salt from the distant ocean. Cass walked into the cool darkness of the storage shed and set her bucket down with a metallic crash. She leaned against the workbench and let out a long, slow breath. Her hands were trembling. Just slightly, just enough that she noticed. Not from fear, not from the physical exertion of carrying the bucket, but from the echo of what she had just done. She had touched the dragon, and the dragon had woken up. For 18 months, she had kept that part of herself locked away. The shooter, the instructor, the operator who could make a rifle sing at distances that turned other people's skills into guesswork. She had buried it under maintenance schedules and brass collection and the careful performance of being forgettable. But it was still there. It had always been there. And touching it again, feeling the rifle's recoil, hearing the ding of steel, making those impossible shots, had reminded her of who she used to be, who she still was underneath the disguise. Through the shed's window, she could see Garrett awkwardly pushing the broom across the concrete. He was struggling to get the pile of brass as neat as she had made it, failing, trying again. His team watched with barely concealed amusement, but they kept their distance. They had learned something today, too. She smiled. Just a little. Just enough. She wasn't just a maintenance tech. She wasn't just a woman in a navy blue hoodie and worn jeans. She was a standard, a benchmark, a reminder that competence didn't announce itself, didn't demand recognition, didn't need permission. And today she had reminded them that standards don't lower themselves for anyone. The door opened. Dutch limped in carrying 2 bottles of cold water. He handed her one without a word. Nice shooting, Tex, he said finally. Little rusty, she admitted, cracking the cap and taking a long drink. Rusty, Dutch snorted. You just put 3 rounds into a teacup at half a mile with a rifle you'd never touched before. If that's rusty, I'd hate to see you polished. He leaned against the door frame, his weight off his bad leg. Vance wants to talk to you, he said, about a real job, lead instructor position. Says he needs someone to teach these kids how to actually shoot instead of just posing for Instagram with expensive rifles. Cass watched Garrett through the window. The young SEAL had stopped sweeping and was looking at the target monitor, shaking his head, probably replaying those 3 impossible shots in his mind. Tell him I'm happy where I am, she said. I like the quiet, and besides, someone has to keep this place clean. Dutch laughed. You're a stubborn woman, Thorne. That's what kept me alive, Chief. She finished her water and tossed the bottle into the recycling bin. Checked her watch, 14:30. She was behind schedule. She walked back out onto the range. The heat hit her like a wall, but she had long since learned to ignore discomfort. It was just another variable to account for, like wind or temperature or the Coriolis effect. Garrett froze as she approached. His grip on the broom tightened. Relax, Morrison, she said. You're missing the spots near the benches. Brass collects in the corners. You have to angle the broom to get it out. She walked past him toward the line of targets that needed fresh paste over the bullet holes. As she passed, she paused. And Morrison, yes, ma'am. Tomorrow, bring your logbook. If you're going to be sweeping my range, I might as well teach you how to read wind while you're at it. Garrett looked up. Surprise and gratitude washed over his face in equal measure. He stood a little taller. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Cass walked down range. The heat rose in waves off the tarmac, making the distant targets shimmer and dance. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew the lesson had landed. The brass was swept. The ego was checked. The standard remained. The wind kicked up again, blowing a strand of blonde hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear, her eyes automatically scanning the horizon. Always watching, always calculating, always ready. The unassuming warrior, hidden in plain sight. Wearing civilian clothes and carrying the weight of a legend she had never asked for, but carried with quiet grace. Behind her in the shade of the covered firing line, Garrett Morrison looked at the broom in his hands, then at the rifle on the bench, then at the distant figure of Cassandra Thorne walking alone into the heat shimmer. And for the first time since earning his trident, he understood that there were levels of competence he hadn't even imagined yet. That the uniform and the rank and the badge were just the beginning. That true expertise was quiet, humble, and utterly devastating when called upon. He returned to his sweeping with new purpose. The afternoon stretched on, the sun beat down, and on the Coronado Precision Rifle Range lessons were learned the old-fashioned way through humility, hard work, and the wisdom of those who had walked the path before. The Phantom had returned, not with fanfare or announcement, but with 3 perfect shots and a simple truth: standards don't lower themselves for anyone. The next morning arrived cold and gray, the marine layer thick enough to taste. Cass pushed through the range gate at 0545 and found Garrett Morrison already there, standing at attention beside lane 5, with a push broom in one hand and his shooting logbook tucked under his arm. He was early. That said something. She nodded to him and continued to the equipment shed without a word. Let him stand there. Let him wonder. The first lesson of the day had nothing to do with shooting. It had everything to do with understanding that expertise didn't operate on his schedule or his expectations. She took her time preparing, filled the coffee maker that Dutch kept in the back corner, checked the inventory of target paste and backer boards, made notes on her clipboard about which lanes needed maintenance. All the mundane tasks that kept a range operational that no one noticed until they weren't done. When she finally emerged 20 minutes later, Garrett was still standing there. His posture had relaxed slightly, but he hadn't moved from his spot, hadn't started sweeping without permission, hadn't wandered off or gotten distracted. Good, he could follow instructions. The sun was breaking through the marine layer, now burning it away in ragged patches. The light had that particular quality of early morning in California, clear and sharp and full of promise. If you're early, you're on time, Cass said, walking past him toward lane 1. If you're on time, you're late. You'll be here at 0530 every morning for the next week. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. I work for a living. Call me Cass or call me Thorne or don't call me anything at all. Yes, Cass. She stopped and turned to face him fully for the first time that morning. He looked different than yesterday. The swagger was gone. The aggressive confidence had been replaced by something more useful. Uncertainty mixed with genuine desire to learn. His eyes were red-rimmed. He hadn't slept well. She knew that look, had worn it herself countless times after long nights spent replaying mistakes, analyzing failures, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. What did you learn yesterday? She asked. The question caught him off guard. He had clearly expected her to start with shooting drills or technical instruction. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. That I made assumptions, he said finally. That I judged based on appearance instead of evidence. What else? That I don't know as much as I thought I did. Cass nodded. That's a start. Put the broom down. Get your rifle. We're going to start with the basics. I already qualified. She held up one hand. He stopped talking immediately. You qualified to minimum standard, she said. Minimum standard means you can hit a target under controlled conditions with unlimited time and no pressure. That's fine for a check-in-the-box evaluation. But minimum standard gets you killed downrange. She walked to lane 5 and gestured to the bench. I'm going to teach you to survive. That's a different curriculum than what you learned in sniper school. So yes, we're starting with basics, because your basics have holes in them big enough to drive a truck through. Garrett set down the broom and retrieved his rifle from its case. The MK-13 Mod 7 gleamed in the early morning light, precision machinery and expensive optics. A beautiful weapon, capable of extraordinary accuracy in the right hands. Set up prone, Cass said. Show me your position. He dropped to the ground and assumed what he clearly thought was proper prone shooting position. Stock in the shoulder cheek on the comb legs, splayed at angles support hand gripping the forend. Cass circled him slowly, studying every detail with the critical eye of someone who had trained hundreds of shooters and could spot the subtle errors that accumulated into major problems. Your left leg, she said. Bend it more at the knee. You want your body weight distributed to minimize muscle tension. Right now, you're flat, which means you're going to fatigue faster, and your natural point of aim is going to shift as you tire. Garrett adjusted. Support hand. You're gripping too tight. The rifle should rest in your hand, not be strangled by it. Tension in your support hand transfers through the weapon and affects harmonics. Another adjustment. Stock weld. Your cheek is pressing too hard. You want consistent contact, not pressure. Every shot should have the exact same relationship between your eye and the scope. Too much pressure means you'll shift between shots without realizing it. She crouched down beside him, her voice dropping to that particular tone of an instructor who had given this speech 1,000 times and would give it 1,000 more because the details mattered. In sniper school, they taught you to pass a test, she said. They taught you to shoot well enough to meet the standard. But the standard is a floor, not a ceiling. I'm going to teach you to shoot well enough that the variables don't matter. Wind, temperature, pressure, stress, fatigue, none of it will matter because your fundamentals will be so deeply ingrained that you could execute them in your sleep. She stood and walked to her equipment bag, pulled out a spotting scope, and set it up on a tripod beside him. There's no target, Garrett said, looking downrange. I know, we're not shooting yet. We're building the foundation. Get comfortable in that position. I want you to hold it for 10 minutes without moving. 10 minutes. Without moving, she repeated. No shifting weight, no adjusting. Find the position that you can maintain indefinitely because downrange you might be in position for hours before you get a shot. If you can't hold still for 10 minutes on a comfortable range, you'll never hold still for 3 hours in a hide site with rocks digging into your ribs and insects crawling on your face. She sat on the bench and pulled out her own logbook, started making notes while he held position. She could see him trying to stay still, could see the micro adjustments as his muscles protested, could track the exact moment when he found something close to a sustainable position. At 8 minutes, his left leg started to tremble. At 9 minutes, sweat was running down his face despite the cool morning air. At 10 minutes exactly, she said, up. Garrett pushed himself to his feet. His legs were shaky. He tried to hide it, but she saw. Tomorrow you'll hold it for 15 minutes, she said. By the end of the week, you'll hold it for 30. Your body needs to understand that discomfort is irrelevant. The shot is what matters. Everything else is just noise. She checked her watch. 06:30. The rest of his team would be arriving soon. Go sweep lanes 1 through 3, she said. When you're done, we'll work on breathing. Garrett nodded and picked up the broom. As he walked away, Cass saw the slight limp in his gait, the stiffness in his left leg from holding position. Good. Muscles had memory. Pain was a teacher. She turned her attention to the range itself, scanning the terrain with the automatic assessment of someone who had spent years reading ground. The wind flags were showing a consistent pattern. Now the marine layer fully burned off the thermals, beginning their daily cycle. Behind her, she heard vehicles on the gravel access road. The rest of Garrett's team right on schedule. The real work was about to begin. They arrived with the same casual confidence as yesterday, but the dynamic had shifted. Blake Sutton, the stocky one, who had made the joke about Garrett needing lessons, was quieter. Trevor Lancaster, the sandy-haired SEAL who had looked uncomfortable during the confrontation, watched Cass with undisguised curiosity. Kyle Brennan and Jackson Ford, the other 2 team members, had clearly heard the story. They kept their distance respectful but uncertain how to interact with a legend who looked like a maintenance worker. Garrett was sweeping lane 2 when they arrived. Blake opened his mouth to make a comment, saw Cass watching, and closed it again. Gentlemen, Cass said, not looking up from the target stand she was repairing, you're welcome to use lanes 6 through 8. Lanes 1 through 5 are reserved for instruction this week. Instruction? Kyle asked. He was tall and lean with the kind of wiry build that spoke of endless endurance training. Your teammate Morrison has volunteered for additional training, Cass said. Commander Vance approved it. If any of you want to participate, you're welcome to join. Otherwise, you've got your lanes. The 4 SEALs looked at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Finally, Trevor stepped forward. I'd like to join if that's acceptable. Blake followed. Yeah, me too. Kyle and Jackson exchanged glances, then nodded. Within 5 minutes, 5 members of Garrett's team were lined up at the shooting benches, rifles and cases, notebooks out waiting. Cass finished tightening the bolt on the target stand and straightened. 5 eager students. She had handled larger classes, but rarely ones with this much natural talent and physical capability. These men had already survived the most brutal military training pipeline in the world. They were intelligent, fit, motivated. They just didn't know what they didn't know. Before we touch the rifles, she said, we're going to talk about wind. She walked to the bed of Dutch's pickup truck and pulled out a large trash bag, the heavy-duty black kind used for construction debris. She also grabbed a wooden stake and a roll of duct tape. Wind reading is the single most important skill in long-range shooting, she said, walking toward the open ground between the firing line and the closest targets. You can have perfect fundamentals, perfect equipment, perfect conditions, and still miss if you read the wind wrong. She used the stake to prop up the trash bag, taping it so it formed a crude flag. It immediately began to flutter and move in the breeze. In sniper school, they taught you to use wind meters, environmental sensors, ballistic computers. All of that technology is excellent when it works. But technology fails. Batteries die. Sensors break. Computers get dropped or shot or submerged. She planted the makeshift flag at the 200-yard line, then walked back to the group. What's that bag telling you about the wind? Blake spoke first. It's moving, maybe 5 miles per hour. Where? Cass asked. What do you mean where? The wind isn't uniform. It changes with distance, with terrain, with time. That bag is telling you about wind at 200 yards at ground level. What's the wind doing at 400 yards, at 600, at 800, at the target? She pointed to the vegetation scattered across the range. Scrub brush patches of grass, a few struggling trees near the canyon walls. Look at the grass near the 400-yard marker. How is it moving compared to the bag? Trevor squinted. Faster, and at a different angle. Exactly. The wind at 400 yards is stronger and coming from a slightly different direction than at 200 yards. That's called wind gradient. Your bullet is going to experience different wind conditions at different points along its flight path. She walked them through a master class in reading the invisible. How Mirage Boyle indicated not just wind speed, but also atmospheric conditions. How dust patterns reveal ground-level currents. How the movement of grass and vegetation at different distances created a three-dimensional map of the air itself. Garrett's hand was cramping from taking notes. She saw him flexing his fingers, trying to keep up with the information flow. Put the notebooks away, she said. This isn't something you learn by writing it down. This is something you learn by looking, by observing, by building a database in your mind of what different conditions look like. She had them lie prone and just watch for 30 minutes. Watch the bag. Watch the grass. Watch the mirage. Watch how the wind shifted and changed, how it built and died, how it created patterns that could be predicted if you paid attention. When she finally let them stand, Kyle's question was immediate. How do you remember all of this? How do you process all these variables in the moment? 10,000 shots, Cass said simply. 10,000 opportunities to watch the wind make a call, see where the bullet actually went, and adjust my mental model. There's no shortcut. You build the database through repetition and failure. She checked her watch. 0900, time to shoot. Garrett, you're up first. Cold bore drill. One shot at 800 yards. No warm-up, no siders. Just like you'd have to do in the field. Garrett took his position behind the rifle. His prone position was already better than yesterday, incorporating the corrections she had made. He settled in, found his natural point of aim, began the ritual of preparation. Cass watched through the spotting scope. She could see everything, the tension in his shoulders, the slight irregularity in his breathing, the micro movement of the crosshairs as he fought to hold steady. Breathing, she said quietly. You're holding your breath too long. 4-count box breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Find the natural pause after exhale. That's when you take the shot. Garrett adjusted. His breathing became more regular, more controlled. The crosshairs steadied. He fired. Through the spotting scope, Cass tracked the impact. Low and left. Miss by 6 inches. Miss low left, she called. Blake called the correction. Blake, spotting with his own scope, hesitated. Elevation up, 1 windage, right half. Why? Cass asked. Because it was low and left. That's where it hit. I asked why. What caused the error? Blake was silent. Trevor, you tell me. Trevor studied his notes from the wind reading session. The wind at the target is left to right stronger than at the muzzle. He didn't hold far enough right to compensate for the full wind gradient. Correct. And the elevation? Temperature maybe? Or he might have jerked the trigger and pulled it down. Cass said. Did you jerk? Garrett's jaw tightened. Yes, I felt the recoil coming and tensed up. Anticipating the recoil, Cass said, is fear disguised as preparation. The rifle is going to recoil. That's physics. Your body knows this. But if you tense up trying to control it, you'll push or pull the shot every time. You have to accept the recoil, not fight it. She had him shoot again and again and again. Each shot was followed by detailed analysis. Not just where the bullet hit, but why. Not just the correction, but the understanding of what had gone wrong. By the 10th shot, Garrett was hitting consistently. Not perfectly, but within the acceptable margin for combat effectiveness. Good, Cass said. Now do it after you've sprinted 400 meters. His face fell. What? You think you're going to be shooting from a comfortable position with your heart rate at 60 beats per minute in combat, run to the 400-yard marker, and back. Then get on the gun and make the shot. Garrett stood and ran. His team watched and Cass could see them making mental notes, understanding that they would be next. He returned 4 minutes later, breathing hard, sweat soaking his shirt. His hands were shaking slightly from exertion and elevated heart rate. On the gun, Cass said. Same target, 800 yards. Garrett dropped into position. His breathing was ragged, his heart pounding. The crosshairs in his scope were dancing wildly. Box breathing, Cass said. Force your body to comply, 4 counts. You control your breath controls your heart rate controls the shake. She watched him fight for control, watched him impose discipline on a body that wanted to gasp for air, watched the crosshairs gradually steady as his physiology responded to his will. He took the shot, hit, not centered but on steel. Again, Cass said, Trevor, you are next. Everyone runs, everyone shoots under stress, because that's the only condition that matters. The morning evolved into a carefully orchestrated cycle of physical stress and technical precision. They ran, they did burpees, they did flutter kicks and mountain climbers until their muscles screamed. Then they shot. And slowly, gradually, they learned to separate the discomfort of the body from the requirements of the task. They learned that fatigue was just noise, that elevated heart rate was just a variable to manage, that the shot was sacred and everything else could be overcome through will and technique. By noon, they were exhausted. Cass was not. She had spent years teaching, years pushing students beyond their perceived limits, and she knew exactly how far to push before damage occurred. Lunch, she said, 1 hour. When you come back, we're doing classroom work. They stumbled toward their vehicles like zombies, moving with the peculiar stiffness of men who had discovered new definitions of fatigue. Garrett lingered. Cass, yeah. Why are you doing this? You're retired. You don't owe us anything. She considered the question while gathering her equipment. The honest answer was complicated. It involved guilt and duty and the faces she saw in her dreams. It involved the knowledge that Garrett's father had lived because of her skill and the responsibility that came with that knowledge. But the simple answer was easier. Because you're going down range in 5 weeks, she said, and I'd rather you come back. That afternoon, they gathered in the climate-controlled classroom building attached to the range. Cass had commandeered the main briefing room, and the whiteboard was already covered in diagrams and formulas. Long-range shooting, she said, is applied mathematics. You can have great instincts and natural talent, but without understanding the underlying physics, you'll plateau. So we're going to talk about the forces acting on a bullet in flight. She drew a parabolic curve on the board. Your bullet leaves the muzzle at roughly 2,800 feet per second. From that moment until it impacts the target, it's subject to multiple forces. Gravity is pulling it down, air resistance is slowing it down, wind is pushing it laterally, and the rotation of the Earth itself is affecting its trajectory. Kyle raised his hand. The rotation of the Earth that seems like it would be negligible. Cass smiled. At short ranges, yes. At 800 yards, it's a 4-inch variance. At 1,200 yards, 8 inches. At 1,500 yards, over a foot. Ignore the Coriolis effect at distance, and you'll miss every time. She spent the next 2 hours walking them through the mathematics. Not just formulas to memorize, but the underlying principles that made the formulas work. She wanted them to understand not just what corrections to make, but why those corrections were necessary. Garrett's hand was cramping again from note-taking. Trevor had filled an entire notebook. Even Blake, who had initially approached the session with barely concealed boredom, was leaning forward engaged. The goal, Cass said, isn't to make you dependent on ballistic computers. The goal is to make you understand the fundamentals so deeply that you can make accurate shots even when all your technology fails. Because it will fail. Murphy's Law is ironclad downrange. She erased part of the board and drew a canyon cross-section. Now let's talk about terrain effects. Morrison, yesterday I mentioned canyon updraft. Explain to the class what that means. Garrett stood. When the sun heats the canyon floor, it creates rising air currents. Those currents create vertical wind components that affect bullet trajectory at certain times of day. Good. And at this range, when does that effect become significant? Around 1400 hours, when the ground temperature peaks. Correct. Now, why does that matter for our shooting solutions? The classroom session continued. They covered spin drift, the Magnus effect, transonic instability, barrel harmonics. Every concept was illustrated with real-world examples, with stories from Cass's own experience that made the abstract concrete. By the time she dismissed them at 1600 hours, their brains were as exhausted as their bodies had been that morning. Tomorrow, she said as they filed out, we shoot at night, with nods, be here at 2000 hours. Blake groaned, Trevor grinned. Garrett just nodded, his face set with determination. The week progressed with relentless intensity. Each day brought new challenges, new skills, new ways of thinking about problems they thought they already understood. Day 3 was night shooting. They learned to work with night optical devices, how to read trace in darkness, how to estimate range without the visual cues they relied on during daylight. Cass demonstrated a shot at 700 yards in complete darkness using only nods and her understanding of holdovers. The impact rang out in the night. Perfect hit. How? Jackson asked, genuinely awed. Math, Cass replied, and 10,000 repetitions, same as everything else. Day 4 was hide construction and camouflage. Cass had them build shooting positions in the scrub-covered hills overlooking the range, then tried to spot them from 800 yards out. She found in all 5 positions within 20 minutes. You're thinking about hiding from people, she said. You need to think about hiding from trained observers. That means no straight lines, no unnatural colors, no movement. Your position should be so well integrated with the terrain that someone could walk within 10 feet and not see you. She rebuilt one of the hides while they watched, demonstrating techniques learned from decades of fieldcraft. When she was done, she positioned herself inside and told them to find her from the firing line. It took them 40 minutes. Day 5 was equipment maintenance and malfunction drills. She had them field strip their rifles clean, every component, reassemble them. Then she induced malfunctions, bad primers, double feeds, broken extractors, and timed how quickly they could diagnose and fix the problems. Your rifle is your life, she said. You need to know it so intimately that you can fix it in darkness in a sandstorm under fire. The weapon doesn't care about your excuses. It will function or it won't, and that's determined by how well you maintain it. Day 6 was multiple target engagement in rapid transition drills. She set up 5 targets at various ranges from 400 to 1,000 yards. They had to engage all 5 in under 2 minutes, including reloading. Garrett completed the drill in 1 minute 43 seconds with 4 hits. The miss was at 900 yards rushed, anticipating the clock. Speed matters, Cass said, but accuracy matters more. A fast miss is still a miss. Find the balance. By day 7, the transformation was visible. These 5 men moved differently, thought differently, approached problems with a depth of understanding they had lacked a week ago. They weren't masters yet. Mastery took years, decades, but they had progressed from competent to genuinely skilled. The final evaluation was simple. Unknown distance targets, no rangefinders, no ballistic computers, just eyes experience and the sum total of everything they had learned. Cass set up 4 targets at ranges she didn't disclose. The team had to estimate range using terrain features, subtension formulas, and educated guessing. Then they had to engage successfully. Blake went first. He studied the targets through his scope, made calculations in his notebook, dialed his adjustments, and shot. 3 hits out of 4. The miss was at the furthest target, which Cass later revealed was at 1,300 yards. Respectable, she said. Your range estimation was off by 40 yards, but your wind call was excellent. Trevor shot next. 4 hits out of 4. Every target, every distance, executed with the methodical precision that had become his hallmark. Cass nodded approval. Solid work, Lancaster. Kyle managed 3 hits. Jackson got 3 as well, struggling with the longest range target like Blake had. Finally, Garrett took his position. Cass watched through the spotting scope as he worked through his process. He had internalized so much over the past week. His breathing was controlled. His position was textbook. His approach was systematic. First target, 650 yards. Hit. Second target, 900 yards. Hit. Third target, 1,100 yards. Hit. The fourth target was the challenge, the same one that had defeated Blake and Kyle and Jackson. Cass had placed it at 1,425 yards, the furthest she had asked any of them to shoot. Garrett studied it for a long time. She could see him working through the problem. Range estimation using the mil-dot reticle, temperature compensation, wind gradient across that distance, Coriolis effect, spin drift, all the variables they had discussed, all the mathematics they had studied. He made his adjustments, took his time, found his breathing pattern, waited for the wind to stabilize. He fired. The shot seemed to hang in the air forever. 2.6 seconds of flight time at that range. Cass counted it off in her head, tracking the vapor trail through her scope. The impact rang across the range like a bell. Dead center. Garrett's team erupted in celebration, high fives backslapping the kind of unrestrained joy that came from witnessing something difficult executed perfectly. Garrett himself just smiled, a small, satisfied expression that spoke of genuine accomplishment rather than ego. He stood and walked over to where Cass was sitting. "Thank you," he said simply. "You did the work," she replied. "I just showed you the path." "No," he said. "You showed me how much I didn't know. That's more valuable." Commander Vance had been watching the final evaluation from a distance, accompanied by Master Chief Wilson and Dutch. Now they approached the group. "Impressive shooting, gentlemen," Vance said. "Morrison, that last shot was exceptional." "Thank you, sir. Cass taught us well." Vance turned to her. "Thorne, a word." They walked away from the group, stopping near the equipment shed, where they could speak privately. "I need you back," Vance said without preamble. "Not as maintenance tech, as lead instructor for the advanced sniper program." Cass had known this was coming. The entire week had been leading to this conversation. "Sir, I'm not—" "Morrison's team deploys to Afghanistan in 4 weeks," Vance interrupted. "Helmand Province. High threat environment." He pulled a folder from his jacket and opened it. Satellite imagery, after-action reports, casualty summaries. "We've lost 6 snipers in the past 3 months," he said quietly. "All Nisapos trained, all killed by the same hostile." He showed her a photograph of a rifle recovered from a cache. Even in the low-quality image, she recognized it immediately. An Orsis T5000 highly customized with aftermarket components that marked it as a precision instrument. "We believe it's Alexei Volkov," Vance said. The name hit her like a physical blow. Alexei Volkov, Russian, former Spetsnaz, one of the best shooters she had ever competed against. "The International Sniper Competition," she said. 2017. "You beat him by 1 point," Vance confirmed. "Apparently he's still bitter about it, and now he's in Afghanistan working as a contractor for whoever pays the highest price. Taliban ISIS doesn't matter. He's killing our people." Cass looked at the photograph. She remembered Volkov, remembered his cold competences, his analytical approach, his absolute refusal to accept second place with grace. "Morrison's team is on the deployment roster for that sector," Vance said. "They're good. After this week, they're better than good. But Volkov is hunting trained snipers specifically. He's looking for worthy opponents. And you think he'll come after them. I think he'll come after anyone with a long gun and a death wish. And I think Morrison's team needs every advantage they can get." Vance closed the folder. "I'm not asking you to deploy with them. I'm asking you to finish their training. 4 more weeks. Intensive instruction. Everything you know about counter-sniper tactics, about reading opponents, about surviving against someone who's just as good as you are. Cass looked across the range to where Garrett and his team were packing their equipment. They were laughing about something still riding the high of successful qualification. They looked young, they looked confident, they looked alive. 4 weeks, she said, then I'm done. 4 weeks, Vance agreed. Thank you, Cass. He walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her ghosts. Dutch found her an hour later, sitting in the shed with the lights off, staring at nothing. Heard you signed back on, he said, settling onto a workbench with a grunt. 4 weeks, training only, then I'm out again. Sure you are, Dutch said with a knowing smile. I mean it. I believe you mean it, I just don't believe you'll stick to it. She didn't respond. Dutch pulled out an old photograph, its edges worn from handling. Your dad, he said, handing it to her. The photograph showed two men in desert camouflage squinting against bright sun. One was clearly Dutch, 40 years younger, less gray, no limp yet. The other was a man Cass barely remembered, her father, who had died when she was 8 years old. Desert Storm 91, Dutch said. Your dad was Army sniper. Best I ever saw, and I saw plenty. He taught me wind reading in Saudi Arabia. Taught me that shooting wasn't about the equipment or the technology. It was about understanding. You never told me you knew him. You never asked. And you were too busy becoming better than he was to care about the past. Cass studied the photograph. Her father's face was lean and hard-weathered by sun and experience, but his eyes held kindness. She could see herself in those eyes. He held the record once, Dutch continued, 1,640 yards. Baghdad Highway, February 91. Iraqi artillery observer. One shot, perfect conditions, perfect execution. He paused, letting that information settle. You broke his record yesterday. 1,425 yards through Morrison's rifle. You coached that shot from the spotting scope, but you could have made it yourself. At that range, under those conditions, you're better than he ever was. I didn't know about his record. He didn't talk about it. He was like you that way. Quiet, competent. Let the work speak for itself. Dutch stood slowly, favoring his bad leg. He used to say that standards don't lower themselves, that excellence is a standard you carry regardless of who's watching. You're trying to make a point, Chief. My point is that phantom runs in your family. Your dad had it, you have it, and those boys out there need it. Volkov is real and he's good, and 4 weeks from now, Morrison's team is going to be in his crosshairs. Dutch limped to the door, then paused. You can't save everyone, Cass. Syria taught you that, but you can teach the next generation how to save themselves. That's not a small thing. He left her alone with the photograph and the weight of legacy. That evening, Cass stood on the observation tower overlooking the range. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. The wind had died down to almost nothing. The temperature was dropping toward comfortable. Below her, the firing line was empty. The brass had been swept. The targets had been reset. Everything was ready for tomorrow. She pulled out her phone and looked at a message she had received earlier. From Garrett Morrison. Just 2 words. Thank you. She typed a response. Be ready. 4 more weeks. Then we make sure you come home. The sun dropped below the horizon. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. And Cassandra Thorne, once called Phantom, stood alone in the gathering darkness and made a promise to herself. She would teach them everything she knew. Every trick, every technique, every hard-won lesson learned through years of combat and training. She would prepare them for Volkov, for the Taliban, for every threat they might face. And if she was very good, if she pushed them hard enough and taught them well enough, maybe they would all come home. Maybe this time the math would work out clean. The night settled over Coronado Range like a blanket. In the distance, the Pacific murmured its eternal song. And in the darkness, a ghost prepared to teach the living how to survive. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion and incremental progress. Cass drove Garrett's team harder than she had driven anyone in years, and they rose to meet every challenge she threw at them. They learned counter-sniper tactics, how to think like the hunter instead of the hunted. They studied Volkov's known patterns from intelligence reports, his preference for elevated positions, his patience, his tendency to take multiple shots from the same height to prove his superiority. By the end of week 2, they could identify likely sniper positions from terrain analysis alone. By week 3, they were running full mission simulations with Cass playing the role of hostile sniper hunting them with training rounds and laser designators. She picked them off ruthlessly the first dozen runs, teaching them through failure what worked and what got you killed. By week 4, they were hunting her back and occasionally winning. On the final day of training, Cass gathered them in the briefing room one last time. The whiteboard behind her was covered in diagrams of Afghan terrain marked with known enemy positions and probable infiltration routes. Everything I've taught you, she said, comes down to 3 principles. Know your environment better than your enemy knows it. Control your physiology under stress. And never ever assume you're the smartest person on the battlefield. She pointed to a satellite image of Helmand province. Volkov is smart, he's patient, he's probably better equipped than you are, but he has a weakness, and it's the same weakness that got him second place in 2017. What weakness? Trevor asked. Pride, Cass said. He can't resist proving he's the best. If he thinks he has an easy shot, he'll take it even when the tactical situation says he should relocate. Use that against him. She spent the next hour going over specific scenarios, decision trees, response protocols. When she finally dismissed them, the sun was setting outside the windows. Garrett lingered after the others had left. We deploy in 72 hours, he said. I know. I'm scared, he admitted. Not of dying, of failing, of letting my team down. Cass studied him. The arrogant SEAL who had mocked her a month ago was gone, replaced by someone more thoughtful, more measured. Fear was good. Fear meant he understood the stakes. Your father felt the same way, she said. Every time he went outside the wire, fear keeps you sharp. It's overconfidence that gets you killed. Did you know him well? Not well, but I knew his reputation. He cared about his men more than his career. That's why they followed him. That's why they trusted him. She paused. You have that same quality. I've watched you with your team. You put them first. That's leadership. Garrett nodded, processing this. If something happens to us out there, if Volkov, then you use everything I taught you. You think, you adapt, you survive. And if you can't do that, you make damn sure your team gets out, even if you don't. That's not very reassuring. I'm not here to reassure you. I'm here to prepare you. He smiled despite himself. Thank you, Cass, for everything. Thank me by coming home. They shook hands and Garrett left. Cass remained in the briefing room staring at the map of Afghanistan. Somewhere in those mountains, Volkov was waiting. And in 72 hours, Garrett's team would be walking into his hunting ground. She pulled out her phone and called Commander Vance. Sir, I need a favor. The deployment came and went. Cass returned to her maintenance duties, sweeping brass and repairing target stands, and trying not to think about 5 men moving through hostile territory 7,000 miles away. Dutch provided updates when he could mission successful team performing well, no contact with hostile forces. But no word on Volkov. The Russian sniper had gone quiet after killing the 6th American sniper 3 weeks before Garrett's team arrived. Intelligence suggested he had relocated possibly to a different province. Some analysts thought he had left Afghanistan entirely. Cass knew better. Predators didn't abandon good hunting grounds. They waited. 3 weeks into the deployment, Dutch found her replacing target backers on Lane 7. Got something you need to see, he said quietly. They went to his office. He closed the door and pulled up a classified report on his computer. Contact report from Morrison's team. 24 hours ago, they were providing overwatch for a village sweep when someone took a shot at their position. 1,500 yards out. Missed Morrison by 4 inches. Cass felt her stomach to tighten. Volkov. Spent casing recovered from the suspected firing position. 7.62 by 54 millimeter R. Russian manufacture, custom load match grade components. He's playing with them. That's the assessment. Morrison's team tried to engage, but by the time they relocated, the shooter was gone. Left a message with a local informant. Dutch turned the monitor so she could read the translated text. Tell Phantom the student is brave, but the teacher should come herself. Our match is not finished. V. The words seemed to pulse on the screen. Volkov knew, somehow he knew she had trained them, and he was using Garrett's team as bait to draw her out. I need comm access, Cass said. Secure line to Morrison's position. Cass, now Dutch. He made the call. 10 minutes later, she was connected to Garrett's team via encrypted satellite link. The audio quality was poor, overlaid with static, and the half-second delay that came with bouncing signals off orbital platforms. Phantom, this is Hawk. Garrett's voice sounded strained even through the distortion. Didn't expect to hear from you. I saw the contact report. Tell me everything. Garrett described the engagement in clinical detail. His team had been positioned on a ridgeline overlooking a valley. The shot had come from the opposite ridge from an abandoned compound they had cleared 2 days earlier. The shooter had waited until Garrett exposed himself to adjust his scope, then fired a shot that should have been impossible, threading through a gap in the rocks barely 18 inches wide. He wasn't trying to kill me, Garrett said. He was showing me he could have if he wanted to. He's establishing dominance, Cass confirmed. Standard predator behavior. He wants you afraid, wants you making mistakes. It's working. My team is spooked. Jackson won't take up position without 3 layers of cover now. Good. Paranoid keeps you alive. What's your current operational tempo? We've got another Overwatch mission in 72 hours. Different valley, same general area. Intel says Taliban commanders meeting in a village. We're supposed to provide long-range reconnaissance. Cass pulled up the map coordinates on Dutch's computer. The terrain was brutal, steep valleys, limited sightlines, countless positions where a skilled sniper could set up undetected. It was a nightmare scenario for counter-sniper operations. Listen to me carefully, she said. Volkov will be watching that mission. He's studied your patterns by now. He knows how you set up, how you rotate positions, how you think. So what do we do differently? You let him think he knows. You set up exactly where he expects you to set up, but you put a decoy in that position. Someone who looks like you at distance, wearing your gear, making the movements he's anticipating. And where will I actually be? Somewhere he doesn't expect. Low ground instead of high, close range instead of far. You won't be in position to engage the village, but you'll be in position to engage him when he takes the shot at your decoy. There was a long pause. That's using my teammate as bait. Your teammate will be behind 3 feet of rock wall with a ballistic dummy in your gear setup. The risk is minimal, but Volkov won't be able to resist. He'll see what he thinks is you exposed and vulnerable, and his pride won't let him walk away from that shot. Another pause. She could hear Garrett discussing with his team, voices too muffled to make out individual words. We'll need a precise firing solution, Garrett said finally. I've never taken a shot at someone who's actively trying to kill me. Yes, you have. Every training run where I hunted you. This is the same. You see the threat, you assess, you execute. Everything else is just noise. Cass, his voice dropped lower. I don't know if I can do this. You can. You've been ready since that 1,400-yard shot in training. Trust your fundamentals. Trust your training. Trust yourself. She walked him through the tactical setup for another 20 minutes, detailing positions, fallback plans, communication protocols. By the time the call ended, Garrett sounded more confident. Not certain certainty was dangerous, but focused. Dutch had been listening the entire time. When the line disconnected, he shook his head slowly. You're running a counter-sniper operation from 7,000 miles away. That's got to be a first. It's not ideal, Cass admitted, but it's what we have. The 72 hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Cass threw herself into work, staying busy to avoid thinking about all the variables she couldn't control. The weather in Helmand province, equipment failures, intelligence gaps, the 1,000 random factors that determined whether soldiers came home or didn't. She was resurfacing lane 4 when her phone rang. Commander Vance. Cass, I've got Morrison's team on satellite comms. They're requesting you on the line. They're in position for the mission. Patch me through. The connection quality was worse than before, degraded by atmospheric conditions over Afghanistan. But Garrett's voice came through clearly enough. Phantom, we're set. Blake is in primary position with the dummy. I'm in the hide we discussed, 600 yards south and 200 feet lower elevation. Trevor's on overwatch with the spotting scope. Environmental conditions. Temperature 32 degrees Celsius. Wind variable 5 to 8 miles per hour from the northwest. Barometric pressure stable. Time on target. Village meeting starts in 20 minutes. If Volkov's watching, he's already in position. We haven't spotted him yet. Cass closed her eyes, visualizing the terrain from the satellite imagery she had memorized. If she were Volkov, where would she set up? Not the obvious high ground too exposed to counter battery fire. Not the near positions too risky if the target had security. Somewhere in the middle distance. Somewhere with multiple egress routes. Somewhere that offered the shot but not the trap. Check the old mining facility, she said. 1,100 yards northeast of Blake's position. Second story eastern exposure. It's the only position that gives him the angle and the escape route. She heard muffled conversation, then Trevor's voice. I've got eyes on that location. Scanning now. Wait. Movement. Second floor eastern window. Someone's there. Can you ID? Negative. Too much shadow, but there's definitely a man-sized shape, and I think I see, yeah, that's a rifle barrel. Long gun, definitely precision weapon. Cass's heart rate didn't change. She had trained for this moment, anticipated it, planned for it. The fear was there, the fear that she was wrong, that Volkov was somewhere else entirely, that Garrett was about to walk into a trap of her own design. But fear was just another variable. It didn't change the math. Garrett, she said quietly, can you range that target? Affirmative. Laser rangefinder puts it at 1,047 yards. Environmental factors same as current. Winds picked up slightly. Now reading 8 to 10 miles per hour northwest direction maintained. Cass did the calculations in her head. The math she had done 10,000 times, the physics that lived in her bones. At that range with those conditions, shooting uphill toward the second story of a building, dial in 5.2 mils elevation, she said. Windage left 1.8. You're shooting uphill, so gravity has less effect on the bullet's arc. Compensate by reducing elevation 0.3 mils from standard. Copy. 5.2 elevation 1.8 left, reduce 0.3 for angle. Dialing now. She could hear the clicks through the phone as Garrett adjusted his scope. Could picture him settling into position, checking his natural point of aim, regulating his breathing. He's moving, Trevor said suddenly. The target in the window. He's taking up a shooting position. I think he's about to fire. Garrett, you need to take this shot now, Cass said. Her voice remained calm, authoritative. Before he shoots at Blake, before he realizes it's a decoy. On scope, Garrett said. I can see him. Jesus, he's right there. I can see his face. Don't think about his face. Think about the reticle. Think about your breathing. 4-count box breathing. In for 4. She could hear Garrett inhaling through the phone. Hold for 4. Silence. Out for 4. The exhale. Hold for 4. Find the natural pause. That's where you take the shot. I'm on the pause, Garrett said. His voice was barely a whisper, now that zone of absolute focus where the world narrows to just the shooter and the target. What's your heart rate? 62. Wait for the next pause. Get it down to 58. You have time. He hasn't fired yet. 30 seconds of silence. Cass stood completely still in the middle of the California range phone pressed to her ear, existing in 2 places at once. Here in the sunshine with the smell of gun oil and concrete. There in the mountains of Afghanistan with a young SEAL she had trained preparing to take a shot that would save his team or condemn them. Heart rate 59, Garrett whispered. Close enough. Read the wind one more time. Mirage boiling left to right. Grass movement consistent with 10 miles per hour sustained wind. Any gusting? Negative. Steady state. Then your hold is good. Trust the math. Squeeze when ready. The silence stretched out. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10. Cass knew what Garrett was experiencing. The weight of the moment. The understanding that this shot was different from every shot he had ever taken. This wasn't punching paper or ringing steel. This was another human being in his crosshairs. Someone with a name and a history and a life that was about to end if Garrett's finger moved 1/4 of an inch. I'm sending, Garrett said. The crack of the rifle came through the phone, tinny and distant, but unmistakable. Then silence. The bullet's flight time at that range was approaching 3 seconds. An eternity, a lifetime compressed into the space between heartbeats. Impact, Trevor's voice sharp with adrenaline. Target down. I say again, target is down. No movement. More silence. Cass realized she had been holding her breath. She forced herself to exhale slowly. Phantom, this is Hawk. Garrett's voice sounded shaky now, the adrenaline hitting him in the aftermath. We're moving to confirm. Negative, Cass said immediately. Do not approach the target location. Volkov works alone, but he plans for contingencies. That position could be rigged. Get your team out of there. Extraction now. But we need to confirm. You need to survive. Move. Now. She heard Garrett issuing orders, heard the controlled chaos of a team executing a tactical withdrawal. The phone connection degraded as they moved, breaking up into fragments of words and static. Then nothing. The line went dead. Cass stood in the middle of lane 4, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the silence. Dutch had come out of his office and was standing nearby, watching her face. Did he make the shot? Dutch asked. Trevor called target down, but I don't know if it was Volkov. I don't know if there was someone else. I don't know if they made it out clean. So now what? Now we wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours crawled by with no word. Cass tried to work but couldn't focus. Tried to eat but had no appetite. She sat in the equipment shed with the lights off, running through the engagement over and over in her mind, looking for mistakes she might have made, calculations she might have gotten wrong. At 2200 hours, her phone rang. Commander Vance. We have confirmation, he said without preamble. Morrison's team extracted safely. The target location was examined by a follow-on QRF team. One hostile KIA. Orsis T-5000 rifle recovered. Custom modifications consistent with known Volkov equipment. Dope book with notes recovered from the site. Cass felt something unknot in her chest. It was him. It was him. Garrett's shot was placed at 1,047 yards. Hit center mass. The hostile died instantly. And Cass, the dope book had entries about you. Notes from that 2017 competition. His last entry was from yesterday. What did it say? Phantom is patient, precise, proud. Underestimating her is a fatal error. I will not make it. Vance paused. He underestimated Morrison instead. That was his fatal error. Morrison made the shot, not me. Morrison made the shot because you taught him how. There's a difference between pulling a trigger and being a sniper. You taught him to be a sniper. After the call ended, Cass sat in the darkness for a long time. She thought about Volkov, who she had competed against and respected despite never liking. A worthy opponent who had let pride overcome tactical judgment. She thought about Garrett, who had gone from arrogant to humble to lethal in the space of 5 weeks. She thought about the strange mathematics of warfare, where the right lesson delivered at the right time could mean the difference between life and death 7,000 miles away. Finally, she stood and walked out into the night. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights. The ocean was a distant murmur. And somewhere in Afghanistan, 5 men were alive because someone had cared enough to teach them properly. 3 weeks later, Garrett's team returned to Coronado. There was a hero's welcome, flags and families and press coverage. A grainy photograph of the team had made it into the base newspaper, 5 exhausted SEALs standing in front of a helicopter, alive and intact. But the first place Garrett went wasn't the ceremony. It was the range. Cass was working on Lane 9, the one she had avoided for 18 months after Syria. The one she had finally reclaimed 2 weeks ago, deciding that hiding from memory wasn't the same as healing from it. She heard his footsteps on the gravel and turned. He looked older. The weight in his eyes was new, that particular burden that came from taking a human life at long range, watching through magnified optics as your bullet ended someone's existence. It was a weight she knew intimately. Morrison, she said. Phantom. They stood looking at each other for a moment. There was no need for words. Some experiences couldn't be conveyed through language, only understood by those who had lived through them. Finally, Garrett reached into his pack and pulled out a book. Volkov's dope book, the one recovered from the site. Thought you should have this. Cass took it carefully. The cover was leather worn from use. Inside were pages of meticulous notes, wine calls, range estimations, equipment settings. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. She flipped to the last page. The entry Vance had quoted was there in Volkov's neat Cyrillic script, translated in pencil by some intelligence analyst. Phantom is patient, precise, proud. Underestimating her is a fatal error. I will not make it. He was wrong about one thing, Garrett said quietly. What's that? You're not proud. You're the most humble person I've ever met. That's why you're the best. You never stopped learning, never stopped improving. You taught us that competence isn't a destination, it's a practice. Cass closed the book. How's your team? Good. Jackson's shoulder is healing up fine from where he took that wound. The rest of us came through clean. We're rotating back to training duty for 6 months before next deployment. And you, how are you handling it? Garrett understood what she was really asking. How are you handling the kill? How are you sleeping? Are the faces haunting you yet? It's hard, he admitted. I keep thinking about it. About him. About the fact that if I'd missed, he would have killed Blake. The math of it. One life for another. The math doesn't get easier, Cass said, but it does get clearer. You made the right call. You saved your team. That has to be enough. Is it enough for you, Syria, I mean? Have you made peace with it? She considered the question honestly. I don't know if peace is possible, but I've learned to live with it, to understand that I did everything right and it still went wrong, and that's the reality of this job. We're not gods. We're just people with specialized skills trying to do the impossible with imperfect information. Commander Vance arrived then, accompanied by Master Chief Wilson and a woman Cass didn't recognize. The woman wore civilian clothes but moved with military bearing. She had the look of someone important trying to appear casual. Thorne, Vance said, there's someone I'd like you to meet. This is Deputy Director Sarah Chen from No Asians, Cass interrupted quietly. Everyone froze. Vance's face went carefully neutral. I'm sorry. No Asians, no Latinos, no one who doesn't have an Anglo-Saxon name. That was part of the deal. The stories we tell the people in them, they have to reflect a specific audience. There was an awkward silence. Then the woman nodded slowly. I understand. Different presentation then. My name is Sarah Whitmore, Deputy Director of Training for SOCOM. I'm here to offer you a position. I already turned down Commander Vance's offer. This is a different offer, not instructor, director. You'd build the entire curriculum from scratch. Hire your own staff, set your own standards. Complete autonomy over how we train the next generation of precision marksmen across all special operations forces. Cass looked at Garrett at the book in her hands at Lane 9, where she had finally stopped running from her past. Can I think about it? Take a week, Whitmore said. But I'll be honest with you, Chief Thorne. We need people like you, not just for the technical skills, but for the understanding of what this work costs and why it matters. The job isn't just teaching people to shoot, it's teaching them to carry the weight of what shooting means. After they left, Cass stood alone on the range again. The sun was climbing toward noon, the heat building, the familiar rhythm of the place settling over her like a comfortable weight. Dutch found her an hour later. Heard you got quite the offer. Word travels fast. Always does. You going to take it? I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me is terrified of what happens if I do. What's the scared part worried about? Cass gestured around the range. This is safe. This is controlled. I sweep brass and fix targets and nobody gets hurt. I took a job training Morrison's team and now Volkov's dead. Actions have consequences. I'm not sure I'm ready for those consequences on a larger scale. Volkov was dead the moment he decided to hunt American snipers, Dutch said firmly. Morrison's shot just made it official. You didn't kill Volkov. You saved 5 men who would have been his victims. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, and deep down you know it. You're just scared of admitting that you're ready to be Phantom again. Not the ghost who hides. The standard that others measure themselves against. 6 months passed. Cass took the position. Not immediately, she made them wait, made sure they understood this was on her terms or not at all. But she took it. The new advanced sniper program facility was state-of-the-art. Multiple ranges, classroom buildings, simulation centers. Cass hired instructors carefully looking not just for shooting skills, but for the ability to teach, to inspire, to push students beyond their perceived limitations. Garrett Morrison was her first hire, Assistant Director of Instruction. He had resisted initially wanting to stay with his team, but she had convinced him that teaching was just another way of leading, that the skills he shared might save dozens of lives down the road. By the program's 3rd iteration, they had 45 students in the pipeline. The class included 5 women, all of them exceptionally qualified, all of them determined to prove they belonged. Cass was demonstrating a 1,000-yard shot when one of the female students, Amanda Pierce, 24 years old, Army Special Forces, approached during a break. "Chief Thorne," Amanda said, her voice carrying a mixture of respect and uncertainty, "can I ask you something? Make it quick. We're back on the line in 5 minutes. Do you think I can do this? Really do this? Everyone's been supportive, but I can see the doubt. I can feel people waiting for me to fail." Cass studied the young woman. She saw herself at that age, hungry, determined, carrying the weight of having to prove something that men never had to prove. The burden of representing not just yourself, but everyone who looked like you. "6 months ago, I was sweeping brass on a range because I didn't think I deserved to teach anymore," Cass said. "I had made a perfect shot that killed the wrong people, and I convinced myself I was done, that I should hide." She gestured around the facility at the students on the ranges, at the instructors running drills. "Now I'm running the most advanced sniper training program in the world. And I got here because someone reminded me that standards don't lower themselves for anyone. That excellence is a practice, not a destination. And that the only opinion that matters is whether you can make the shot when it counts." Amanda nodded, slowly processing this. "So to answer your question," Cass continued, "I don't think you can do this. I know you can do this because I've watched you shoot. I've seen your scores. I've observed your discipline and your dedication. But none of that matters if you don't believe it yourself. The doubt you're feeling, that's not weakness. That's wisdom. It means you understand how hard this is. Use it. Let it make you sharper, more focused, more determined." "Yes, Chief." "And Pierce." "Yes, Chief. When you graduate, not if when you're going to be the standard other people measure themselves against. That's not a burden. That's an opportunity. Make it count." Amanda returned to the firing line with renewed purpose. Cass watched her go, then turned to find Garrett standing nearby. "Good speech," he said. "Wasn't a speech, was the truth." "Same thing sometimes." He handed her a cup of coffee. "We got the evaluation results back from the last class. 93% pass rate, highest in program history, and the students who graduated are performing exceptionally well in the field. 3 confirmed lives saved in the past month alone because of techniques we taught them." 3 we know about, Cass corrected. "Could be more. The best outcomes are the ones where nothing bad happens because they were prepared." They stood together on the observation tower, looking out across the ranges. Students were shooting on 5 different lanes, instructors coaching the steady crack of rifle fire, punctuating the afternoon air. "You know what I think about sometimes," Garrett said. "That day you took my rifle. Those 3 shots. Everything changed in that moment. Not just for me, but for everyone who's come through this program since. You set a standard with those 3 shots. Proved that expertise doesn't need permission, doesn't need credentials, doesn't need anything except competence. I was just making a point. You were establishing legacy, but there's a difference, yeah." Dutch appeared at the base of the tower stairs, moving more slowly now than he had 6 months ago, the limp more pronounced. But his eyes were still sharp, still missing nothing. "Got someone here to see you, Cass," he called up. "Says it's important." She descended the stairs to find a young Marine corporal dress uniform, crisp, holding a folded flag and an envelope. "Chief Thorne, I'm Corporal David Bennett. I served with your father in Desert Storm." He couldn't have been more than 50, which meant he had been very young during that war. "I was a new boot, didn't know anything. Your father taught me how to shoot, how to think, how to survive." He held out the envelope. "He asked me to deliver this to you if you ever took up the profession. Said he'd know if you did somehow. Said it was important." Cass took the envelope with trembling hands. Her father had died when she was 8 years old. This letter had been waiting for 28 years, held by a man who had kept his promise to a fallen comrade. She opened it carefully. The paper inside was yellowed with age, the handwriting achingly familiar from the few documents she had of her father's. "Cassandra, if you are reading this, then you have become a sniper. I always knew you would. You have the eyes for it, that way of seeing the world in distances and angles of understanding that patience is more valuable than speed. By now you have learned that this profession costs something, that every shot carries weight, even the ones that save lives, especially the ones that save lives. You'll have made mistakes. You'll have faces that haunt you. You'll have wondered if the price is worth paying. I can't answer that for you. Every shooter has to find their own peace with what we do. But I can tell you this, the standard you carry is bigger than you. It's bigger than any individual shot or mission or mistake. It's about the people you save by being better than good enough. It's about the students you teach who will save others in turn. It's about maintaining excellence in a world that constantly tries to erode it. You'll be tempted to quit, to walk away, to decide the cost is too high. And maybe sometimes that's the right choice. But if you're reading this, I suspect you've already come back, that you found your way through the darkness to the other side. The name they'll give you, whatever call sign you earn, doesn't matter. Ghost, phantom, shadow, whatever it is. The name is just a placeholder for the standard. And the standard cast is simple: be so good that excellence becomes normal. Be so competent that impossible becomes routine. Be so dedicated that the next generation has a foundation to build on. I'm proud of you. I was proud of you the day you were born, and I'll be proud of you the day you read this, even though I won't be there to say it in person. You carry my legacy, but you'll build your own. Make it count. Standards don't lower themselves, daughter. They rise because people like you refuse to accept good enough. Love, Dad. Cass read the letter 3 times before she trusted herself to look up. Corporal Bennett was still standing there, patient and respectful. He talked about you every day, Bennett said quietly, about his little girl who could calculate distances before she could read. He said you'd be better than him someday. He was right. Thank you for keeping this, for bringing it to me. It was my honor, Chief. He saved my life in the desert. This was the least I could do. After Bennett left, Cass walked back up to the observation tower. Garrett had tactfully moved away, giving her space. She stood alone with her father's letter, watching the next generation of snipers train under the afternoon sun. Her phone buzzed, a text from one of the field units. Crisis situation resolved. Hostile sniper eliminated at 450 yards by graduate from Class 3. 0 friendly casualties. Techniques learned in your program directly responsible for success. She read the message twice, then looked out across the ranges again. 45 students currently training. 312 graduates in the field. Each one of them carrying forward the standards she had set, the lessons she had taught, the excellence she had demanded. The mathematics of it were staggering. How many lives saved by those 312 shooters? How many future students would those graduates train? In turn, how far would the ripple effects extend? Her father had been right. The standard was bigger than any individual. It was a living thing, growing and evolving, carried forward by everyone who refused to accept mediocrity. Amanda Pierce was on the 1,000-yard line, now settling into position for her qualification shot. Cass watched through binoculars as the young woman went through her pre-shot routine. Breathing check, natural point of aim verification, wind assessment. The shot cracked across the range. The impact rang clear and true. Hit. Dead center. Amanda stood, cleared her weapon, and turned toward the tower. Even at this distance, Cass could see the smile on her face. Not arrogance, not pride, just the quiet satisfaction of a job done right, a standard met, a challenge overcome. Garrett returned to stand beside Cass. That's the 5th perfect qualification this month. You're building an army of phantoms. Not phantoms, Cass said. Something better. People who understand that the call sign doesn't matter. The standard is what matters. The work is what matters. The lives saved are what matters. She folded her father's letter carefully and put it in her pocket close to her heart. Come on, she said. We've got another class starting tomorrow. 40 new students, all of them thinking they're ready, none of them understanding what ready actually means. You're going to break them down first day like you broke us down. Cass smiled. What kind of question is that? Of course I am. That's the standard. They descended the tower together and walked toward the main facility. Behind them, the ranges continued their eternal symphony, the crack of rifles, the ring of steel, the sound of excellence being forged through repetition and discipline, and refusal to accept anything less than perfect. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of the ocean in the desert, that unique California blend of salt and sage. Cassandra Thorne once called, Phantom walked through the facility she had built, past the students she had trained toward the future she was creating, one shot at a time. The ghost had become legend. The legend had become standard. And the standard would live on, carried forward by everyone she taught. Everyone they taught in turn, rippling outward through time and space in ways she could calculate but never fully measure. Behind her on lane 9, a target stood waiting for tomorrow's class. And above it, barely visible in the fading light, a small plaque that Dutch had installed without telling her. It read simply, "Standards over everything." The words her father had lived by. The words she had taught. The words that would outlive them all. She paused to read it one more time, then continued walking. There was work to do. There always was. And she wouldn't have it any other way. The phantom had found her purpose. Not in hiding, not in memory, but in the eternal work of building excellence, one student, one shot, one standard at a time. The night settled over Coronado. The stars emerged. And somewhere 7,000 miles away, a graduate of the program she had built made an impossible shot that saved lives that would never know her name. But Cass knew. She felt it in her bones, the way a conductor feels the orchestra's rhythm, the way a teacher knows when the lesson has truly landed. The standard remained. It always would. Because some things don't lower themselves for anyone. Not for fear, not for doubt, not for time itself. Excellence was forever. And she had built something that would carry it forward long after she was gone. That was enough. That was everything. That was the shot that mattered most.